All right, welcome to our next lesson for the private pilot course, Online Ground School. My name is Micah Small. I'll be your CFI guiding you through the National Airspace System lesson. All right, without further ado, let's get started. We're going to talk about the airspace, and that's basically just a portion of the atmosphere above any particular area. Generally, it's above a nation, but there are some other special areas too. We won't get too deep into those, but we will look at the airspace that's divided into several sectors and classes, and also the specific rules that apply to each class, mostly in the United States. Okay. Why? It's just because we have to understand the different airspaces to be able to efficiently transverse through that airspace and to know our rules and what we can and can't do as a pilot. So to fly through these airspace, a pilot has to know the specific rules and requirements. So the content we're going to go through today is going to be airspace, the classes, rules, requirements, special VFR, special use airspace, other airspace, and VFR charts. Again, we won't get too in-depth on the VFR charts because that is going to be in our cross-country planning lesson later on. So first, we'll start in Class E, or Class Echo, as we call it. We use the phonetic alphabet as pilots, so you'll hear me refer to everything as Class Alpha, Class Bravo, Class Charlie, Class Delta, or Class Echo. We do not have a Class Foxtrot, but we do have a Class Golf. So Class Echo airspace then, and you can see the visibility requirements and cloud clearances and qualifications are all broken down on the right-hand side, so you can take quicker notes from that. But we'll go through all of it here as quickly as we can, but as thorough as we can as well, okay? So to be in Class Echo, you do have to have a transponder at or above 10,000 feet MSL, okay? That also has to be within 30 nautical miles of a Class B primary airport. If you're below 10,000 feet MSL, and within and above all Class Charlie airspace up to 10,000 feet MSL. Also within 10 nautical miles of a designated airport. Flying into, within, or across the ADIS, which is on the it's kind of like the warning area on the outside of the country, the edges of the country. Okay. ADS-B out requirements at and above 10,000 feet MSL and at and above 3,000 feet MSL over the Gulf of Mexico if you're within 12 nautical miles of the coast. And your airspeed limits then below 10,000 feet MSL, it's going to be 250 knots. And then if you are below 2,500 feet AGL, within 4 nautical miles of a Class Charlie or Delta airport, the speed limit there will be 200 knots. And then transversing through the areas near Class Bravo or a VFR corridor through the Class Bravo, or then under the Class Bravo is going to be 200 knots, okay? And there's different speed limits for the different airspace as well. So Class Echo airspace is largely, it's controlled, but it's not as controlled as A, B, C, or D. So you don't have as many requirements. And then the minimum qualification would be student pilot. All right, so another look here a little bit at Class Echo. ATC services, there's no communication requirements for VFR traffic, but you can request traffic advisories. That is if they are capable, if they have the time, okay? And then IFR, anytime you file IFR instrument flight rules, air traffic control communication is required. But as you guys are going through this private pilot course right now, the IFR is not going to pertain to you, okay? Vertical limits are going to be 14,500 feet to 17,999 feet MSL. And then it's going to be over the surface or designated altitude to the overlying adjacent controlled airspace. So if you look at the chart over here on the right, you see that shaded magenta line. That tells you your Class Echo airspace is a floor of 700 feet above the surface. And then right outside that is going to be some Class Golf, okay? If you see a dotted magenta line in that top right picture, you see the dotted blue circle and the dotted magenta line. That dotted magenta line then is actually Class E down to the surface. And then if you look anywhere on the charts and see that blue shaded line in the key over on the lower right, it's very rare to find that anymore, but you will find it down In the Texas areas, by the Gulf of Mexico, then you'll find it in Alaska as well. And that just tells you that the Class Echo starts at 1,200 feet instead of 700 feet. Okay. So the low altitude airway system there is airways 1,200 feet AGL up to, but not including 18,000 MSL. And those airways are generally 8 nautical miles wide. So, and like I said, we get into cross-country planning. You're going to get a lot more information on this. It's going to be easier to read. So this is just the basics that we're looking at right now. So Class Delta airspace, that is that dotted or dashed blue line inside that Echo. So you see that Class Echo we just learned about starts at 700. Well, this blue line starts at the surface. And it goes up to 2,500 feet above the airport elevation. And then that Echo surrounds it as well. Okay, so it's a 4 nautical mile radius around the airport. And this one, if you look at the airport symbol in the middle, you can see the blue circle with the tick marks all around it and the star on top of it. So that is showing you where the airport is in relation to the city. The city is the yellow portion there. And then it shows you the star on top of that, tells you that the airfield has a rotating beacon so you can see it at night. And the tick marks just generally indicate that there's fuel or service available at that airfield. Okay. So if you look above where it says Hickory Regional, HKY, and it's got some numbers and things there, you'll see a star after that 128.15. That star tells you that that is the radio frequency to communicate with that field, and it is going to act as Class Echo when the tower is not open. So it does have a part-time tower. That's what that star indicates, but it's not all the time. So you'd have to look in the chart supplement to find out the hours of that tower. And when it's not closed, then it would be Class Echo airspace. So these can be changed. The Echo around these Delta are configured for like the approaches and different things at the airport. So it can be a weird shape or have some kind of goofy shapes to the Echo airspace around that Delta to meet the needs and procedures of that particular area. So to fly in Class Delta airspace or to a Class Delta airfield, you do not need any specific certification. You can fly in there as a student pilot, but you must have a two-way radio and you must establish two-way communication before entering. So what that means is as you're flying towards their field, you'll be on their frequency, you'll contact Hickory Regional and tell them, who you are by your tail number and what your request is, and then they will, as soon as they acknowledge you and say, yes, tail number N12345, once they have acknowledged you and repeated your tail number back, that means you have established two-way communication with them. So Class Delta, you do not need a clearance to enter. They don't have to tell you you're cleared to enter, but you do have to have two-way communication before you enter their airfield, their airspace, rather. All right, Class Charlie. So that is that thick, solid magenta line there. Notice it's not shaded or dashed, so that designates a Class Charlie. And if you look around that circle, it tells you that certain areas start, the very center is a 5 nautical mile radius around the airport. That starts at the surface and goes up to 5,000 feet. Then you can see the shelf around that. Above it and around it in that bigger shelf area starts at 2,500 feet and goes to 5,000 feet. And then the lower right-hand corner, that shelf starts at 3,500 feet and goes up to 5,000 feet. So the surface, again, 4,000 to up to above 4,000 above the airport. That 5 nautical mile radius is the core. That's surface to 4,000. And then the shelf, the 10 nautical mile is the shelf. And that can be anywhere from 1,200 to 4,000 feet. But it's depicted on the chart with those numbers. The Class Charlie does have an operating control tower, and they do also utilize approach control. And then the general operating rules, again, you don't need any specific pilot certification, so students are allowed to enter and operate in Class Charlie airspace. But once again, you do have to have that two-way radio communication where you have established your two-way communication with them, but you also have to have the Mode C transponder and the ADS-B out on your aircraft. Okay, and then again, one more with requirement with that ADS-B out is in and above Class C airspace up to 10,000 feet MSL, you are required to have ADS-B out, and that's just for traffic safety. Okay, So looking at the side then, again, you've got that chart there. Our minimum visibility is 3 statute miles. Minimum cloud clearance, 5,000 feet below, 1,000 feet above, 2,000 feet horizontal. You are okay to enter as a student pilot if you have established radio communication, a Mode C transponder, and ADS-B out. And then air traffic control will actually provide separation for IFR to IFR and VFR traffic. And you can get flight following or VFR traffic advisories if they are not too busy and have time and allow you to do that, okay? So Class Bravo then, this is the busiest airspace in the U.S., Class Bravo is. It's around 37 airports in the United States. Again, it's that thick solid blue line around there, and then you'll see that thick magenta line around the airport as well. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, let's start by going through these bullet points lists, and then we'll talk about the other rules and regulations for Class Bravo. So Class Bravo, again, you'll notice all those blue lines. It's going to be different shelves. It's going to kind of look like you take a wedding cake and put it upside down, and it's used at the nation's busiest airports. The altitudes and layers are tailored to the needs of the area and generally maxes out at 10,000 feet MSL, okay? Now you can see all those blue lines and cutaways and different things. So this is where you really have to get good at reading the chart on these for the shelf heights. Okay, so where it starts at the surface and goes to 10,000, where it starts at, one spot looks like it starts at 1,800 and goes to 10,000. So you really have to be mindful of those, and when you're planning your flights, you really have to be careful, okay? So operating rules for Class Bravo. Certification, you do have to have, at a minimum, a private pilot certificate to operate in this area, unless you are a student rec or sport pilot with an endorsement that takes special training to get. The exception to the exception is there are certain airfields that do not allow solo ops, and that is going to be found in the AIM 3-2-3B. So there's a list there that you can go through and see what airports you cannot solo at. Unless you have at least that private certificate, okay? So there are some rules there to be mindful of. When in doubt, just check with your CFI, and they will help you find the information you need for planning any of your flights. Okay, the equipment needed then. The big one here is the two-way communication. But instead of just establishing two-way communication, air traffic control clearance is required before entering. So that means you must actually hear them say, November 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you are cleared to enter the Bravo. If you do not hear that and you go into that airspace, you will have to explain yourself to the tower and to the FAA, and there is a chance that you could get your certifications suspended. So we want to make sure that we are always cleared to enter this Class Bravo airspace. It's just so busy, it's a safety thing. It's trying to keep you and everyone else safe, okay? Now that magenta line or that pink line around the outside of that airfield is a 30 nautical mile range outside of that main airport in that Bravo, and it goes up to 10,000 feet MSL. That's mean sea level. So that just means mean sea level, so how high you are. And in and around Bravo, you have to have the ADS-B out, that clearance to get in it, and you have to have the transponder with altitude reporting. But inside that 30 nautical mile radius, you are also required to have all of that stuff. So even if there's a part of that airspace that you won't be in Bravo or you'll be under a shelf, if you're within 30 nautical miles of that busy Bravo airport, you are still going to need to have all of those things. So that would be the transponder with altitude reporting and ADS-B out, okay? And then Class Alpha, generally, as private pilots, you are not allowed to operate in Class A airspace until you earn an instrument rating. So that airspace starts at 18,000 feet MSL, and then it goes up to and includes flight level 600. Above flight level 600, it will turn back into Echo. Okay. Operating rules for Class A airspace. Again, all operations conducted there are under instrument flight rules. Okay. There is no choice. It's just you have to file IFR and you have to fly IFR up there. and that's just a requirement for operating Class A airspace. So again, as a private pilot without an instrument rating, you're not going to be able to be up there. And then ADS-B out is required in all Class A airspace. So Class Golf then, that's the uncontrolled airspace that's not designated as Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo, and it extends from the surface to the base of the overlying Class Echo airspace. Okay. ATC has no authority or responsibility to control Class Golf traffic. So you are VFR and on your own in golf. So that's where we need to really watch out for our collision and avoidance scanning in the cockpit when we're flying. All right, so Class Golf, let's talk a little bit about the cloud clearances there and the weather minimums there. So daytime in Class Golf, it's got to be 1 statute mile of visibility and remain clear of clouds, okay? And this is if you're at 1,200 feet AGL or less. So 1 statute mile of visibility and clear of clouds. In the nighttime, it reverts to basic cloud clearance, which is 3 statute miles of visibility, 500 feet below the clouds, 1,000 feet above the clouds, and 2,000 feet horizontal from the clouds, okay? So that is the 1,200 AGL or less day and night. Then the VFR minimum visibility below 10,000 feet. Daytime is 1 statute miles, nighttime is 3 statute miles, and then at and above 10,000 feet MSL, it's always 5 statute miles. Okay, the minimum cloud clearances then below 10,000 feet is 500 feet below, 1,000 feet above, 2,000 feet horizontal. And then if you're above 10,000 feet, you have to have 1,000 feet below, 1,000 feet above, and 1 statute mile horizontal clearance. And then the minimum pilot qualifications, student pilot can operate in Class Golf. There is no VFR entry and equipment necessary for this. And there are ATC advisories on request, permitting they have the time. And again, like I said, when we get farther into your training and you do some more of the flight planning, we will talk more about your weather and cloud clearances too. So it's not impeccable that you memorize all of these right now. We will get to that in later lessons and teach you a little bit better way of memorizing all that stuff as well. Right now, it's just informational. Okay. So let's go back over the summary. So we'll go in alphabetical order for the airspace here. So Class A requires an ATC clearance. You have to be IFR equipped, and the plane has to be IFR equipped, and the pilot has to have an instrument rating at minimum. Okay. Class Bravo, you have to have an ATC clearance. Remember, that is you are cleared to enter the Bravo. If you don't hear that, you can't go in. The equipment necessary, you have to have a 2-way radio, a transponder with altitude reporting capability, and ADS-B out on your aircraft. And then you have to have at least a private with some certain exceptions that your instructor can help you with. Okay. Class Charlie, 2-way radio communications prior to enter. You don't have to be cleared, but you do have to have established 2-way communications. So that means the equipment's needed is a 2-way radio transponder with altitude reporting capability and ADS-B out. There is no specific certificate required to enter Charlie. Delta, 2-way radio communications prior to entry. So the only requirement for Delta is that 2-way radio. You do not have to have a specific certificate. Now for Class Echo, you have no entry requirements for VFR, but you do have to have a transponder as specified for the area that you're in, and you have to have an ADS-B as specified for the area that you're in. And again, no certificate requirements there. And then for Class Golf, there is no entry requirements, no equipment requirements, and no certificate requirements for golf. So let's talk a little bit about special VFR. So the clearance to operate under VFR with less than VFR weather minimums, you can get those clearances in Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or Echo, the surface areas of Echo below 10,000 feet. ATC cannot give you this. You have to request it before they will allow you to do it. Okay. It can only be conducted with an ATC clearance. You have to remain clear of clouds and have at least 1 statute mile of flight visibility. However, if it's at night, you must be an instrument-rated pilot in an instrument-certified aircraft. And like a lot of things in aviation, there are certain airports that are just a little bit too busy and don't allow it at all. So that would be in Part 91, Appendix D, Section 3. So again, a lot of these numbers we're throwing at you right now when you're just starting to learn don't make a lot of sense. They will eventually. So for now, if you need to, you can send me a message, or you can ask me if I'm your in-person instructor as well, or ask your CFI, and they can help you find that information if you need it. All right, so special use airspace. Let's talk a little bit about these just briefly. Prohibited areas, it's exactly what it means. You are prohibited from entering those, and it's usually associated with national welfare. Restricted areas, while not prohibited, they are subject to restrictions. Generally, it's due to hazards, okay? Warning areas extend from 3 nautical miles outward from the coasts, and there could be potentially hazardous activities there. Military operations areas separate military training traffic from IFR traffic, so there's no restriction for VFR. But again, just avoid if possible. Alert areas alert pilots to high volumes of training or unusual activity in different areas of aviation. And then controlled firing areas, you're not going to see those depicted on a chart, but it's hazard activities like missile testing or ballistics, anything like that. They're watching for aircraft on their own radar or binoculars or what, and as you approach, they're just going to stop what they're doing until you transverse the area and then move on. So you'll never see that depicted on a chart. And you can see on the right-hand side there, you see that blue line with like the hatch marks coming to the inside, and then you see a P-40 or an R-4009. That is the prohibited. So P is for prohibited, R is for restricted, and that tells you. Then you can go to your chart supplement and you could look that up and see what it is, the controlling agency, any of that stuff, so you can get in touch with them to see if they are active or not active, or when you can transverse the area, etc. So SFRA, or Special Flight Rules Area, there's 2 places in the United States. One's over the Grand Canyon, one's over Washington, D.C., and you just have to have some special training to be able to fly into those areas, and that is available on the FAA's website. So it's very specific rules to those 2 areas. Local airport advisory is just an area within 10 nautical miles of an airport. They don't have a control tower, but they do have FSS. Okay. Military training routes, those are routes used by military aircraft, so they don't pertain to private pilots. And then we can see some things like parachute jump areas, published VFR routes. We'll see a TERSA depicted on the map with like a gray area. You see the gray circle there around an airfield. Fargo, North Dakota's got a TERSA that's still active if you want to look at that. It's just basically the old national airspace system from the 70s and 80s that has been phased away, and there's a few still running. And then a national security area, and that is, national security area is not a no-fly zone. It's not prohibited, but it's just strongly suggested that you don't enter. So it's not wholly prohibited, but it would just be smartest to avoid them. And then occasionally those will pop up as like a TFR or something too, where it is not allowed to fly in there. All right, so the chart symbology, you can look at that Aeronautical Chart User's Guide on your own that the FAA puts out, and you can learn some of the symbols. We will go through some of that more in the chart planning stages of this course as well, so we'll get more in depth on that. And the updates, just terminal and sectional charts, are updated every 56 days. If you have the big wall planning chart at your airport, those come out every year. And then the biggest thing is just always maintain your charts, verify, and use the current chart editions. If you're using an EFB or an electronic flight bag like a 4Flight, it'll alert you when you need to download new updates. So that is the basics of the National Airspace System. We will go a lot more in depth in that as we progress through the course and as you get farther in aviation. But for now, that's the basics of it. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments below or contact us through the website. You can ask me in person if I am your flight instructor, or you can ask your flight instructor as well, and we would all be more than happy to answer any questions for you. So again, as always, thanks for tagging along with us on this short flight, and be safe out there.